what we'll do, we'll discuss tomorrow, next week, but we'll find a solution on how to sort that. Richard, is there anything from you this week?
Probably the only thing I thought was interesting were the bodies they found down in Haverfordwest.
Oh,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, that's definitely something to actually have a look at. Hopefully they release stuff soon. Well, one thing that I thought was that I'm not sure whether this is actually the same thing as what you mentioned, actually, Richard. Let me quickly find where it could be. Basically, I found this really interesting article about they found in Great Britain 20 probable royal burial sites in England and Wales mostly, and it was dating back to the time of King Arthur. And there's a lot of discussion behind that. They're quite unusual graves, but they actually provided a lot of Welsh examples, which is quite interesting because normally we see that Wales is in it's not in the limelight, it's quite ignored in the corner, in the dark. But they're actually focusing on Wales for this as a really good example. And the first one that they gave, hopefully we'll be able to actually have a more detailed discussion on this, so I don't want to go into it too much. This was one of the graves that they had in Wales. It's almost like it has an enclosure, and the burial inside, it has this weird circular little pit thing nearby as well. So I'm thinking of looking more into it because it's quite interesting, and the fact that they have 20 of these sites is it's definitely something to explore. I'm not sure whether this is these graves are unique in terms of I'm not sure why they know that it's royal, because the artifacts found aren't of huge importance. You'd expect gold and things to represent power and wealth, but there's not much of that, so it's making me question as to why they think is a royal burial. What is that common characteristic, and what sets it differently from other burials as well? So trying to find out more information other than just that article, more academic articles, because I think that could expand the interpretation a little bit further. But hopefully we'll do that another time. I've already started looking into it like crazy because it was just really interesting to actually look back on. So we'll get into today. I decided to just take us to Brecon, which is quite vast, and I know there's loads of archaeology here and we're only scraping the surface. But I was really impressed with how they show off the archaeology with pride as well. It's going to work. There you go. So I decided just to have a look at a few bits and bobs, and it goes up in the timeline of history, so going to prehistory and then going to Roman, etc. Just looking at how these areas in time show that there's a difference in the archaeology and how that is able to represent not just Welsh identity or trade or connections, but showing why the archaeology in Brecon is so important. The archaeology here is given so much respect, and I think this is something to take note of, and it just makes me think of what they can do if there's more funding. There's a large green area, and you can only imagine if you're standing in one spot, whether you're standing on layers upon layers of different archaeological evidence. And I know there's a debate there as well, a discussion about clearing trees or the landscape just to excavate an area, and some people are very iffy about that. There's a page on Facebook that I definitely recommend. The page basically looks at anomalies in the landscape. So it's quite a nerdy group, but basically you have people comparing a lot of maps. They'll go from old maps. This is a aerial photography and then LiDAR imagery, and it's a non-invasive way of examining the archaeology. So a lot of people have been using that for Brecon. But the only thing that bothers me with that is that you can see structures, etc., but you can't find the little bit that can tell you more about everyday life, that can tell you more about the identity of the community or the individual. And I think that's the only thing that I have against that type of archaeology, because I like to focus on the really niche things about what this can mean about style or identity, or even just how they're able to show off their power and wealth just from their appearance. For example, if it was rings or brooches, and even pottery as well. I like looking at the pottery. So this national park, I think it has provided evidence here of if you study and love and protect the archaeology, it can be enjoyed by tourists of today and even future generations. And that is so important, especially in a time where looking at Welsh archaeology and history in the curriculum is slowly starting to seep in. And this means in the future, I think we're going to see a lot of scholars and young academics actually focusing on Wales. For example, this is quite strange. This is just from my experience. But for example, Swansea University, when I was there, didn't have that many courses on Welsh history. Whereas my friend who went to Cardiff, and I had another friend that went to Lampeter University, they focused a lot on Welsh history. And I think we're only going to start the beginning of more and more people having this as a course, as more and more academics start teaching in universities as well, because that'll inspire other students just by doing a course that can inspire someone's dissertation and future research. So I think the national park here is providing the protection and making sure that everything is relegated over there. And I know that it's a very large area, but it seems to be a common understanding of protecting the archaeology, even down to metal detectorists, which we will see where they give over the things that they found in order to actually provide more evidence for the discussion of history in Brecon. But the archaeology that is present, it shows it is so vital, it's so important to document everything that you were able to find, because it helps with our understanding of Welsh history, it widens it. But there is a debate again on how we're able to actually protect the archaeology. Do we take it away or do we keep it where it is? A lot of people tend to think that some of the buildings should be moved, etc., which we won't be talking about those more recent examples. For example, post-medieval, if they're still standing, but we won't do post-medieval today. I just wanted to focus on more of the earlier history. So like I said, we'll go more into the protection. If you go on the National Park website, that's really impressive to actually look at that and see how this area is really, people are standing behind it. They actually care and they actually want to look after this. So Brecon Beacons National Park, their website, they have a bit that's called Looking After Our Archaeology. And this is a special place. This is a legacy of our ancestors, and it contains so much wealth of information. And they want to ensure that archaeological remains that are fragile, they can be lost. So it's best to record them and keep all that information, because there is a wealth of information here. And the role of the national park is to look after and maintain, even enhance this special historical place. and there's lots of well-preserved sites along this park. And there's things that makes this park special, and it is because of the history. It can give us a timeline of the echoes of the past and our ancestors. And there is a lot of focus on archaeological remains as well, and how we can look into how to discuss them, understand them, to understand what condition they are in, and if there are any threats to the survival of the archaeology. And they do work quite closely. The employees of this park actually works quite closely with an archaeologist who works on site, and they record the archaeology within the park itself. And they also work quite closely with Welsh Archaeological Trust and Cadw and the Royal Commission of Ancient and Historical Monuments in Wales. And I think that shows a dedication here, that they're willing to have someone on site that's able to record everything and provide information. And it just makes you think that if they had enough funding, what else they could do. And a lot of people have sort of discussed whether we should actually care about the archaeology. And I think it definitely is something to care about, because not only is there curiosity of our past, there's also a need to want to know about our identity and our past, and all the different cultures we've interacted with, and the different events in our history as well. It creates us today. It is our identity today. And I think this area is a great one, because a lot of people want to go and dig up the place, and I can understand, but a lot of people want to put the trees before anything else. This is absolutely fantastic, because the website, they actually give you rules on how you can protect the archaeology here. So they don't just say what they want to do. They say to help them protect the archaeology, there's some do's and don'ts. So they encourage, so they say, do enjoy glimpsing back at the past. So they encourage people looking at these archaeological sites. They tell people to do remember that each archaeological site is special and unique, and it helps provide evidence as to why this park is so unique. And they're saying, do remember that archaeological sites are valuable and precious, but finite resource that can contain information about our ancestors. And once we've damaged that information, that vital clue of the past, it can be lost forever or distorted. And they say to remember that not all archaeological sites are large. So they say that some of them can be very small. And they say that if you're not sure whether it's an archaeological site, just leave it alone. That's their rule, is to just leave it alone. If you're not sure whether it's an archaeological site, just leave it. It's best to leave it, because they put the focus on protecting the archaeology and preventing it from being damaged. And they do encourage people to let anyone know about any damage. There is an infamous stone that we will be talking about, and there has been graffiti put on this stone quite recently. And it's just a shame, because this stone is now, even though that's technically part of his history, having something added to it, it's distorted what that stone meant. And the park has done everything that it can to actually ensure that it is protected. So they also said that you don't disturb these archaeological sites. You don't move any stones, or you remove any. They've encouraged you to don't dig on the archaeological site, don't remove any material from the archaeological site, don't have a barbecue or a bonfire or a campfire around an archaeological site. Don't drive or ride over any earthworks, and don't dump or store anything on an archaeological site. And lastly, don't use metal detectors on scheduled ancient monuments on the park owned land, or anywhere without landowners' permission. So they've put a lot here, and I think it's good that you can actually access this on the website, because you are understanding, I think those do's and don'ts, they tell you what you can and can't do, but they also tell you the reason why things are important. So I like the fact that they wanted you to remember why this park is so unique, and it's because of our unique history. And then they talk about how this is a vital clue to our past, and that if we damage any of the archaeology, that's something that's affected and distorted forever. And I think it was a very powerful thing to look on their website, because you can see how much care has gone into this. And this is clearly done by a group of people that care so much. So we'll go on to our first slide. So if I just quickly just get on my notes quickly. Ooh, apologies, don't know which one it is. Aha, I found it. So this was one of the sites that was actually covered in graffiti. Someone had put a smiley face on there, which is quite a shame. This is actually quite large. It looks quite small. It looks like someone's done it up close, but it's actually quite big. And it was just a shame, really, just to see the fact that this was damaged. It just seems like some people just don't care about the uniqueness of the archaeology and the history. And what I found about this was that there's not much known. It standing 60 metres off the minor road between the Senni Valley and Ustrafelity, and it's an impressive stone. And this is quite interesting, because when you look at it, you can kind of see that this is an unusual shape. So a lot of people have been questioning on whether this unusual shape actually indicates anything. If I just quickly just make my notes a little bit bigger, because I can't seem to, there it is. Just click, make, aha, there you go. So this is absolutely beautiful. It's definitely got beautiful sort of views, and there's a lot of folklore that is brought up about this. And this is thought to be very important, because this is in relation to another site that we will be discussing. But basically, this is situated between the Brecon beacons and the Black Mountain that overlook the hills of Llanfawr, and is a massive size of a rock. This is made out of sandstone as well, and is unknown. So a lot of people seem to think that this was a way of marking, leaving a mark behind them. This must have been an important pass point as well, between the hills, because local prehistoric population, both to the local prehistoric population and the Roman, they came about a long time later to when this was created, so 3,000 years later. But when the Romans were able to come here, they built the road San Helen right by the stone, and the current road still follows part of his course as well, which we will talk about. But it seemed like the Romans understood that this was also something to take note of, because it was something that was a marking point. But up until recently, so the 1940s, there was some discussion and recordings about this having more than just what we see of this shape. So this could have had more to it, and this could have been weathered as well. So this could have been a reference to possibly a tribe or a community that was sort of living in the area and just saying that this was their territory. But as of the 1940s, there was some faint Latin and Ogham, a medieval alphabet that was inscribed into the stone, but due to weathering, it was removed. It was gone forever. So it's definitely quite an interesting one, because it seems to have this relevance throughout time in the prehistoric period, and then you have the Romans 3,000 years later, and then after the Romans, you definitely start to see the medieval period was finding some uses of this as well. It could have been some medieval version of graffiti, really, just like graffiti was added onto this. But I'll try and quickly find if there was any inscription, what it said. So there is some inscriptions as well, more recent. So you have 1869 on there. Again, some graffiti from the not Roman period, Victorian period, for example, and you can see that quite clearly on the side of it. So this has been something that's been at an attack of people who like to graffiti, basically. But I can't find any references to what that inscription of the Ogham was saying. Just that it was faint, which is quite interesting. Whether this could have been having writing on there, maybe could this possibly be a pilgrimage sort of route as well in the medieval period? It's not sure, but it's not visible anymore. And there is a legend tied to this. There's always a legend that's tied to something like this. And the legend says that whenever a cock crows, the stone moves off to drink into the River Need. And don't know why the stone feels the need to drink into the River Need, but it does. And then there's another story where the stone visits the river Melt and on the midsummer morning. And I think there's a lot of magic that sort of surrounds these stones because we're not sure what they mean. And our ancestors in the prehistoric period is a magical time because we know so little. And I think for us, our mind goes crazy. But I think it's just something to understand, that try and bring ourselves into the prehistoric period. And this could have been a way to just say that this was your territory. Maybe it could have been a marker. Maybe this could have been where you marked your territory, but it could have been a meeting point for anyone that was going through the land for possibly trade. Maybe you met there as a point to trade. And that is something that we will discuss with one of the other sites as well. Could this be a meeting point for trade? And then in the Roman period, they kind of carried on that tradition of using this as a marking point with their road, so they knew where they were going. And then in the medieval period, there's some inscriptions on there, but now we're not sure what those inscriptions were. But it could be graffiti, and at this point we kind of see that with the Victorian period as well, and more recently. And this stone has seen a lot of history, a lot of hands touch it and interact, and I think the original message and meaning of it is now lost, and we can only theorize. But this is definitely something that it would be quite magical to see, because it is big, and seeing some images of people standing next to it and they look, you realise how big it is, and just the landscape is beautiful. So we get to the next one, this Bronze Age art that's been discussed. So if I just quickly get onto my notes. So, where is it gone? Aha. So this was something that was quite interesting, this prehistoric rock art that had been found. And this could have been a way marker for prehistoric farming communities. So this is more than 4,000 years old, and it was discovered in the Brecon beacons. And it was made in 2013 by a archaeologist, and this was Alan Bowrin. So one thing that I've come to realise is that they don't just have an archaeologist on site that records everything, they have a geologist as well, and it seems like they work quite well with each other. But the experts here claim that this stone probably served as a way marker for these farming communities. Maybe this could have been a way marker as well, we're not sure. We're not sure whether this stood up or whether it stayed flat on the floor as well. So if it stood up, it's quite weathered, as you can see. Maybe this had cut marks or some sort of marks, and it's just weathered off. But this is for similar stones have been found throughout Britain, but this is quite rare for mid Wales. The exact location is actually being kept a secret, and you can see how archaeologists have found similar ancient rock in Scottish Highlands as well. So they were comparing this in 2014, but this is around about 4 foot 9 inches long, and is 1 foot 8 inches wide. And it has 12 cup marks of various shapes and sizes on the face of this. So the shapes and sizes, a lot of people seem to think that this is a very personal identifying mark, like a signature. Everyone does their own cut mark different. If I just have a drink a minute, apologies. They're all different. So this could be representing each individual in the community. It could represent each family in the area. There's lots of theories on that. And when we went to Cornwall, I remember just outside a grave, well, it was a grave, a burial, which a road had gone right on top. So this would have been in a mound. Right outside it was a rock like this with some cup marks. And so this is why I seem to think that this is a way that people left their mark, just like we leave a signature on things. Who knows? But I feel like that anyway. But that was just my way of trying to explain the different marks, basically. But this, like I said, is now laying flat on the ground, but experts are actually leaning more onto the discussion that it was actually standing upright at one point. The geologist, Bowen, that was working on the land, which was maintained by the National Trust, he was actually helping out and he spotted the rock. And he just had a gut feeling that this was unusual, something to actually look into, actually take some focus on. And he decided to get the archaeologist involved, which was Natalie Ward. And they had this experience of recording similar artifacts in the north of England. So they felt like that she was the one to actually bring some more information on this. So Bowen actually said that he found himself working and walking in a lot of remote locations here in Brecon. And he said that he's able to find a lot of hidden features in the landscape. And he said that a few others would have seen the walk quite often around here. But he said this is a chance discovery for him. This was just something that he had a gut feeling over. And this has been so significant in the understanding of human cultural history in this area. And the archaeological survey that was done by the National Trust had already highlighted that there was Bronze Age features in the area. So this was giving some context to the stone's past. A Dr. George Nash, who is an archaeologist, and he specialises mostly in prehistoric archaeology. He also looks at contemporary art, which is quite an unusual combination there, but he's from Bristol University. And he confirmed Bowen's finds. He said that this was the first prehistoric rock engraved panel that had been recorded in the Brecon beacons. And Dr. Nash added that based on the shape of the stone and the engravings on it, it probably came from the Middle Bronze Age period. So we're talking around about 2500 BC to 1500 BC. And this could have been a way marker. And this is absolutely fantastic. This could have, when you look at all the prehistoric burial sites in Brecon beacons, this is the first rock art to ever be recorded in the Brecon beacons, and there are no other later prehistoric standing stones within this part of Wales that have cup marks on there that they know of at the moment. So this one's quite rather unique, and again it reflects back onto their principles of their do's and don'ts of how unique the archaeology is. This is something that they were trying to say earlier on. But this is the most common form of later prehistoric rock art from Britain and Europe. And the occurrence here in Mid Wales is quite rare. So again, we can just understand the appreciation of how rare this all is. I'll just quickly get on to the hang on, my thing's just updated. So I just thought that was quite fantastic. That's something that I would run my hands along and actually think of the individuals that would have made that. Would there be thoughts going through their heads as they did this? Was this a rite of passage for when you become a certain age, you were able to leave your mark on the family sort of plaque, if that makes sense? Because it reminds me a little bit of something that my mum done. My mum has a wall in the house where we have loads of images of family, and in our old house we had a painting that we had all done, and I can't remember what it was, but it did entail our hands, so we had to stick our hands in paint, and the whole family was put onto this painting, and it was just left in the front room where all these pictures were. And it just made me think, well, is this a similar sort of situation where that's how they're able to record their loved ones? They can't do face paint, hand paint, sorry, so they actually mark it out into the stone. Could this just sort of represent something more as well? This could have been a way that they could, that maybe sort of farmers, and I have read quite recently that a lot of people seem to think that there's a connection with this being with dairy farmers, for example, which I would like to look into further in the future. But this could have been a way marker where they knew that this could be a family that they could trade with, possibly, that they wanted something from this farming and they would have traded in return. That's something to actually think about. But it definitely carries on being a way marker throughout its history. And the fact that it's being kept secret shows how large it is. But it would be nice if it was cleaned up and even put somewhere in a National Museum of Wales, possibly. And I think another way to actually protect this archaeology, I think it would be fantastic for Brecon to actually have his own museum, in terms of like a centre in the heart of it all, where all the finds like this are put into a display for everyone to enjoy. So we'll get to the next one here. So this is something that a metal detectorist had found. And I think, again, the way that the metal detectorists dealt with this shows how much they care as well. It's not just about treasure or money. And there was one article talk about, I couldn't get a photo, unfortunately, but in 2020, a medieval silver ring was found in Brecon, and the individual handed it over and was happy for that discussion. And it just showed that that was something that was nothing to do with a settlement. It just seemed like it was dropped. But in 2016, so this is near the edge of Brecon, that this Steve Davis, a metal detectorist, had found this fantastic hoard here. And it had a mixture of bronze tools and weapons and ornaments, and a gold bracelet, and it was quite an unusual mix, and this is now in the National Museum of Wales, but I wanted to sort of take note of these things here. They seem to be like this one here, it seems like to be some sort of animal. I'm not sure what it could be, and the other one here could be an animal as well. I'm not sure whether it's meant to represent livestock, but you can see the bangles here. I think that's part of the bangle, and then you have all the weapons here, like the axe heads, etc. And one thing that I wanted to take note of is how this axe head as well looks like the axe head that we saw when we were looking at Flathome, for example, the one that they put out onto display. But this is absolutely fantastic find, and it is now on display. But this is something that I want to take note of, and I think this is the reason why metal detecting is banned from the area, but it still happens. I think what I would do personally, if anyone buys a metal detector, and I have one, but my only issue is that I know where to metal detect and where not to metal detect, but some people don't, and they chance their luck and they end up with 10 grand fines. And I think they should be taught more on what they can and can't do by putting a little booklet maybe in with the metal detector. I think more should be done by the government to actually protect our heritage and our archaeology. I know quite recently there depending on where you are going, the council is very focused on looking after the archaeology and heritage for the sake of for the ward of the community as well. For example, Cairo Hill Fort is a great testament of how great the heritage can be looked after and shown off with great pride, and how the community can be involved with better funding. And that comes down to more political attention. But unfortunately, some areas are deprived of that. And I think we need to have more of a movement to try and bring that focus, because things like this are so important. We know more about this, but I was just thinking more and more when I was looking at this, is what those ornaments could be, what that could entail. Because to me, they look like little animals. So I was thinking, are they toys? Could have this represented an individual? Could have this been their treasure that represented who they were? Because there was no burials nearby. But it just seemed like this individual here, if that's the case, that the fine ornaments, could this represent the fact that they had great livestock? And this was something that they made a living from, and it made them proud. And the bangle, for example, that was some sort of wealth, the fact that it's made from gold as well, and that would show more about the trade and connections to the area. And then I was looking at the axe heads. It clearly showed that this individual had some skill with dealing with that, and whether this meant that they were a warrior or whether they were just a farmer, who knows? But it was definitely interesting to look at that, because we can only speculate again more about the individual that would have owned these. But it just seemed to be one of those finds that was plonked there. There was nothing nearby, and it was just an unusual mix. Go on, Anne.
There's a little small bangle that could be a child's bangle.
Yeah. Well,
so with the little animals,
yeah, like toys.
Or just they're toys, but then they could be, when they're born, they might make them little, like give them gifts or something. Little, bronze animal. I don't know. But it does look like a child's bracelet.
Yeah.
Compared to the other one, the size of the other one.
Yeah. I agree. Well, I was thinking, well, we're not really sure of the scale of it. So whether it was a normal bangle, and then this could have been, because it could have been like one of those necklaces. This, so if I just get rid of this a minute.
Unless it's a torque.
Well, I was thinking this here, was that the one that was that could go around someone's neck? So you'd have like the bit, it looked like headphones, but like that.
That's does look like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I was thinking maybe that's what it is, and then you have a bangle next to it. The animals, could that be almost not toys? Could that be the sort of spirit guides, or if like we think of that? Yeah, to protect them in their journey. It seemed like this individual, the weapons that they had, maybe they could be protecting themselves. Maybe they wanted to keep that with them as a form of protection. This is a time period where there is that sort of survival of the fittest, really, isn't there? So this could be an individual that was sort of protecting themselves. But I thought it was quite unusual because they didn't expand further with those animals. So I've been trying to think of what they could possibly look like, but they drive me up the wall. And I will be honest.
Like bear. One looks like a bear, but that one at the top looks like a bear. But
I was thinking, is this could this be a horse, but the head's missing?
Yeah, it could be.
So we're not sure. We've speculated, I think, quite well.
I can't remember when the horses came over. I can't remember.
I'll find that, Anne, because I think this was a time when we had horses, but it was so basically before farming, we did interact with horses, but they weren't tamed. So there was a time where we were interacting with horses before they were tamed, but I think they were tamed at this time period.
The Bronze Age is really interesting.
Definitely
in the upland areas, because it would have been cleared, it would have been cleared of forestry, so people would live there, you know.
Yeah, definitely. There are, and this is something that I would like to say for future lectures, but there are evidence of hill forts, etc., and lots of Bronze Age evidences going on in this area as well, that I think we should give a lot of attention to one day, because it's absolutely fantastic to actually look at all the archaeology that's coming from the Bronze Age and see how that this is able to tell us more and more. I think one thing at the moment is that it's going to be difficult to find pottery, and especially remains that aren't explicit in the landscape.
Do they?
Oh, hang on a minute. Oh, sorry. The children are being loud. Yeah, so what I was thinking was that basically I feel like the Bronze Age period in the Brecon beacons can actually tell us a lot about our ancestors and our past. And I think it shows how the craftsmanship of this time period, I just think, is really impressive. Just the design that they've put on that axe head, for example, is just, it didn't need to be put there, but I think the fact that this design shows that possibly there was a good, stable way of living where they had themselves in a way where they understood the landscape and they knew how to get food, etc., to a way that they had time to actually put in decoration to things and refine their skills with metal working, for example. And I definitely think the gold is evidence of trade as well, with anyone nearby. Most possibly in the north, but I just thought it was a weird, unusual mix of objects, and we'll move on to the next site. Well, this was a chance find in a way, and one thing that I noticed is that we won't find many sort of remains that are explicit in the earthworks. We won't find many pieces of pottery. I think we will find a lot of big structures and metal, because that would be the most easily identifiable through LiDAR imagery, through metal detectors, for example. But we move on to this. This is part of a Roman wall that is in the Brecon Beacons, which is at the bottom there. This is in the National Park website. However, they do not explain further. And to me, this suggests that something was going on here in this time period. But what we see at the top image is this fantastic road, and this road is what's important to understanding the connections of the Romans. And I think it tells us more trade. Well, it's not just about the connections, for example. So the Roman period, obviously, it sees the end of the Iron Age period, and we can see this through all the evidence that's being left behind for us to all look at. St Helen is the best preserved stretches of roads in Wales. There you go, the top road there, St Helen. And this road runs north of Coed y Garreg towards Brecon, and the method of construction here is best seen at Mine Maddock, where the cobbled surface and the ditch is exposed. But when the Romans invaded Britain in 43 AD, they needed a system of roads to be able to move troops and any goods around their new territory. So compared to the existing tracks and trails across Britain, the Roman roads must have been an extraordinary social revolution for the people of Britain at the time. And some of the roads here the Romans had built, they had absorbed into our modern road system. So this one, for example, you can see can still be used, but some of them have been left to the wild, some of them have been isolated, and some that remain. But this stretch of road here is St Helen. And in truth, this name refers to not one stretch of road, but several linked sections here. And this is stretching 160 miles through central Wales, from Carmarthen to Aberconwy. And this is just something that you can sort of walk down and just imagine all the individuals, but this is thought to connect, for example, Chepstow all the way to South Wales, and through these stretches of road. This allowed the Romans to actually get around and be able to communicate and hold their power here even more stronger. But to reach San Helen, there's a minor road north of Ystraffelite, which is the Forestry Commission parking area beside Avonlea. And there's a trail that leads uphill. So there's past the site of a Roman camp to the road. So the road, the building at the bottom is thought to be the evidence of a Roman camp here. But the easier section of the road to make out emerges from this forestry plantation, and this sort of reaches the sand and stone of Mine Maddock. And we even see how this road at the top's kind of used that as one of their marking points as well. So it seemed like the Roman roads actually sort of followed the mark points of the native Britons. I think the Romans understood that we understood our landscape better than them, and so it was probably best to look at us for an example. But this cobbled surface is clearly built by the Romans, and it's absolutely fantastic because this road has stayed so intact. But like, again, the Latin inscription on this stone could be referenced in terms of the Romans interacting here. And this is thought to actually, this stone, actually, the inscription is thought to actually mark the site of a Romano-Christian burial. But however, this is something that's just been discussed. They didn't actually find anything there of that. So those are connected. But the Romans did not call this road San Helen. This name refers to the story of Saint Ellen of Carnarvon, which had ordered it to be built the 4th century AD. And what we'll do, we'll get to the next one. So we'll quickly go to Langors Lake, which we have talked about in our Thursday lessons, but this is definitely something that's so interesting. And in that image that we have of that crannog there, is the fabric that was found at the site here, which is showing more than just how unique this area is, because this is the only crannog in Wales. Well, at the time when it was found, it was the only crannog in Wales, but we know that there was some evidence to suggest that there was another crannog, another site in Wales where they basically the water had dried up and a housing estate was being built up on top. So if I just quickly get back to my notes, I've completely forgot where we've gone. But just quickly get on to, no, that's not what I want. That's not what I want. Hang on, I'll quickly find this. But right, if I just quickly go into this, mostly crannogs are prehistoric. This one's unusual because it's showing that this is medieval, early medieval, and it's been used in a very different way. It's unknown how the crannogs were used in the prehistoric period. However, we have had quite a few discussions on whether they be workshops or a way to store food or somewhere where they could have sort of rites of passage. Just realised that some of the work here has been cut off, which has actually annoyed me, but just listen to me. It kind of gives you a bit of a gist, but I'll carry on. But they're artificial islands, and they can be built on timber. Sometimes individuals in the past have used the landscape, but this one was built using timber. And you could have some stones at the bottom as well that be built up. So the most that we find are in Ireland and Scotland, but this is really interesting. This isn't the only known example. We know another one, but it's thought to actually be occupied by a very high status and wealthy individual here. And the waterlogged deposit of that fine linen that has been decorated, which has animals on there, which is on silk as well, silk thread, was found there. And you can see the fantastic colours on that as well. It's an absolute masterpiece. It was in 1991 that they had this excavation. They found a lump of charred textile, and it was thought that an Anglo-Saxon princess was abducted and kept here. And so the Anglo-Saxons had burnt this to the ground. This is absolutely fantastic. The actual tapestry itself has representations of birds and this very unusual fruit as well, and lots of vines. And I was thinking, maybe is this a religious context to it all? But birds and lots of vines on this. Unfortunately, none of the colour was kept preserved in the textile, so it was very difficult to see what the design would be like. But they have a reconstruction in that image there. That's a digital simulation of the colour of a photograph of the original textile. But in 1990, when they were looking at this site and they found this textile, they realised that this was over 1,000 years old, and it was really unique. It's thought to be a royal site of Brecon, in the 890s. And this is a turbulent history in the kingdom's history, because this kingdom was under pressure from several neighbouring kingdoms, and Langors must have seemed as a safe retreat. But excavations on this site have shown that it was very short-lived. When we get to the 900s, for example, the early 900s, that's when disaster struck. Most of the archaeological evidence here is focused on the waterlogged silt that are surrounding the crannog, but it was here where the textile was discovered. It was quite badly charred. It was very fragile. But careful conservation treatment, which is big in this area, it was possible to separate and clean many layers, and they were able to find more about this textiles. But you can see that there was even repeating patterns and even lions and framework of vines on this textile. The skill was so amazing on all of this, and it shows just how you can sit back and wonder at the skill. The linen has 23 threads to a centimetre, and it is a significant achievement to find and to actually create in that time period. But this is thought to actually be part of a hem or even a belt loop. But very little survives of this to actually tell us more about the detailed shape and the way it was worn. But the owner would have been someone who had high status, because silk would have had to be imported to Britain, and the quality of the needlework was suggesting that this was made in a specialist workshop. So how did this become to be lost? A clue is found in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, 916 AD. And there's records in this year of a Mercian army from England destroying a site at Langors Lake, where they captured the wife of the king and 33 other persons. And they think that this was the burning of Langors and the loss of the textile. And I think this is very tempting, and I believe that to be correct as well. So so we'll go for the last two here. Tree Tower Castle. I know we've looked at the court, but the castle is absolutely fantastic to look at. This is really interesting. It's medieval, and the Tree Tower has actually been it was thought to be built here in the 1300s, but it has changed a lot of fashions. There's been a lot of things changed to this. And you can see that there was a transition here from it being a castle to a domestic residence. And I think it just shows the important situations here of warfare and defence in the early medieval ages to a very peaceful and more settled and more organised area in later centuries. And you can definitely see how there's, if initially this would have been a Motte and Bailey castle of earth and timber, which would have been constructed by Pickard. But when we get to the mid-12th century, a shell keep was created at the site of the Motte, and it was replacing the earlier timber defences that they had there. The third major phase here involved the construction of the Great Tower, so in addition to the walls and of the Castle Bailey. But the evidence for the late building suggests that this was periodic refortifications. The castle may have been abandoned as a residence by the early 1300s, but little is known about the earliest earth and timber castle that was built by Pickard at the turn of the 1000s. But nonetheless, this is resembled many other Motte and Bailey castles built at this time. And what I think here is just showing this defence here of the Normans is them leaving their mark, their legacy on our history. And you can definitely see that this was a place of residence. You can see that there was more of an aesthetically pleasing sort of design to it, even just down to this would have had a roof on it, and I think it would have been seen like a little sort of chamber that would go off with the lovely sort of arched doorways here. And you can see how there's a lot of force being put into the kitchen here. You can see that there's a lot of beautiful dress stones that go here, and the stones would have been arranged beautifully there. This was a building with a lot of wealth and power, and this was something to symbolise that. And there was a lot of protection in this. But there's a lot of Romanesque domestic work here, although it's weathered, we can kind of see that. And first, this is actually thought to be the best as well preserving of that period now surviving in Wales. For the first half of the 1200s, you see a lot of modernisation to this tower. And the central feature was imposing this circular tower constructed within the earlier shell keep. So this was to provide space for this tower. The block forming the hall and the solar was gutted, and the inner walls were demolished. And this round keep was the characteristics for most of the time. And you can see that there's lots of examples of this, the Southern March. But this tower was designed to give garrison a clear field of fire over the counter parapet. But this communication between this new tower and the curtain was provided by the means of a bridge that was crossing from the west side of the former wall walk along the curtain. So you see this completed keep. This is a little bit more fortified, a little bit more stronger as well. And I think with this being a royal residence, I think they are trying to actually sort of make a statement here as wealthy individuals that they have power despite not being royalty. But this is absolutely fantastic to look at, and you can definitely see how the tower, for example, had some very turbulent times in its history. Basically, there was garrison being put into the storerooms at the time when the castle was needed the most, because in 1403, you have the Glyndŵr revolt, which really affected this at this point, and we see a change. So if we go to the final one here now, at Carreg Cannon Castle. This is absolutely fantastic to look at that. It's really breathtaking to actually look and take into all of this. So if I just quickly find my notes, I don't know why. Yeah, of course, it's messed up. I'll find it this way. So this is close to the River Trap. So it's 4 miles south of Llandudno. And the castle is within the national park, and it's absolutely spectacular, but it's above a limestone precipice. And you have this, it's been in a ruin since the 1462, but is now in the care of the Welsh government, for example. More and more focus is on the evidence. There is some prehistoric evidence that was found at this site as well. There was an Iron Age hill fort that was found here as well. So there was even Roman coins being found here from the 1st to 2nd century. But it was unlikely that the Romans actually occupied this site at a Roman basis. So they could have actually went here to visit, almost like tourists. We know that the Romans actually had done that as well. The early castle was built by Lord Rhys, who died in 1197, but remained in the possession of de Buarth for the next 50 years. But when it came, this then was granted to the Normans, and the English took possession of it after the Rhys captured the castle. For the next 30 years, it changed hands frequently between Rhys and his uncle, and they were fighting for control of the kingdom. But when we get to 1277, it was captured by the English and recaptured by the Welsh in 1282. And then the English hands it again the following years. It was changing power on who takes this. 1283, Edward I granted the castle to John Griffith who was the commander of the English troops, where Llewellyn ap Gruffydd was killed as well. So he was one that was around that, but he remodeled the castle to what we see today. The Owain Glyndŵr rebellions in 1403 saw 800 men attacked here, but there was they had a lot of severe damage to the walls, but they were failing to take the castle despite the castle being damaged. It was too strong for Owain Glyndŵr. And Owain himself, he was present by a man who was to marry one of Glyndŵr's daughters just a few years later, which was Sir John Sudamore of Herefordshire. And even in the Wars of the Roses, the damage was repaired here in 1409. But in 1461, during the War of the Roses, this became a Lancastrian stronghold. A Yorkist force subsequently captured the castle and set about demolishing it with a team of 500 men. And the ownership of the castle is now part of the Vaughan and Cador families from the 18th century, and it started to attract a lot of artists here. And you could definitely see how the castle is now maintained by Cadw and an ownership of Cadw. So it's open between 9:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. in April and October, and 9:30 to 4 p.m. in November and March. But it's closed on Christmas Day, apparently. So this is definitely something that's absolutely fantastic. In conclusion, I think there needs to be more attention and even funding to the archaeology of Wales as a whole. And I think Brecon was a good way of showing this off on how we can actually make a difference if we do that, because everything is unique and important. And it teaches people, even young people, to actually have a lot of pride and care in their archaeology. The area has provided some archaeological marvels that we can actually enjoy and understand and see how magical the past is of Wales. And the area is covered in archaeology, which will be gradually being brought up in the future. But this is protected archaeology, and for a good reason, because they want to protect the landscape as well as the archaeology. So what I'll do, I'll stop sharing and I'll ask that, Anne, is there anything that you'd like to ask or add?
Well, I think it does verify that feeling that there is a lot more archaeology to be found. But of course, I suppose that it must have been wooden dwellings and things like that, you know, that people lived in. And I'm just quite interested in this Caerphilly Mountain, you know, the Sengennydd Dyke area, you know, and I didn't realise that was a modern, you know, relatively modern. It's like medieval.
Yeah.
There was a hunting, you know, it's the edge of a hunting
yeah,
kind of area. I thought it was like a natural fault, you know. And
yeah, I've had situations like that, and they catch you out.
Yeah, and I, you know, but I am quite fascinated in the, you know, particularly Brecon Beacons. You know, it really was the uplands, wasn't it? And you can see that it's been deforested, and you know, you can understand our ancestors, you know, going there and you know, to farm or live, you know, and this, but they could do with a bit more archaeology. I don't think they do focus enough on Wales, you know, this area of Wales.
Yeah, I think there's that it is an issue with funding. I think that's the main focus, and that then feeds into the fact that there's a lack of attention, and then I think that feeds into the best way to solve it is to get the younger generations interested, and more universities will be doing more and more courses, because more and more people will be qualified in Welsh history, and then that will inspire more people, and is only going into the curriculum now for high schools, for example, Welsh history. So it only makes you wonder how that will inspire the next generation and what that could mean for our archaeology and history. Hopefully, this is a really important move for seeing our archaeology just expand in a very positive way, really. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic area that there.
Yeah, definitely.
Sort of, because it hasn't had, most of the Vale and most of the sort of lowlands in the south have been ploughed, and modern ploughing goes so deep now. But sort of areas like up in Brecon and everything, if they've been ploughed in sort of medieval times or even up to the sort of, late 19th century, hasn't been the real destructive ploughing that you get now.
Yeah.
So I think must be a hell of a lot of remains there that are there to be discovered.
Yeah,
It'd be nice if they could do a extensive sort of geophys survey of the whole area.
Yeah, it's left and it's undisturbed archaeology, and I think that was a good point, Richard, that if there was ploughing, that it would be medieval. It's most likely to be much older because it's been left untouched for so many years. So that would just tell us more about the history in itself. And I think it's absolutely fantastic just seeing how our past is sort of left the echoes of what once was. Is definitely a lovely area, and I just hope that more and more gets done for the area, and this inspires other areas as well to act and focus on it as well.
There's little known about it. You can't read much about it in books.
No.
Like
so
you will in the south.
Yeah, it's definitely something I think to enjoy if you're someone who actually goes there for walks quite often, like that geologist, because I can only imagine the things that they've found that they just keep on the down low, because they might not have funding to look at it, but they're able to actually sort of know that it's there and record that it's there, but keep a secret from the public to protect it until they can actually look at it properly.
Yeah, it's a hard area to protect. Being so vast,
Yeah, definitely.
Even geology, I got a little book, Observer's Book of Geology, and I think it was probably 40. It must be about 40 years old, but not a mention of not much mention of Wales in there at all.
No,
it's all Britain, England, and Scotland and even Ireland, but a bit of Pembrokeshire, So I think you're absolutely right. It's got to, maybe it'll be a new area for research. Or, we're getting
definitely.
We'll be getting lots of people down.
Thank you both, and thank you for that as well, Anne. It's definitely one to look out for. But I'll see you tomorrow, Anne, and I'll see you next week, Richard. So take care, both, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Nostal. Bye.
Hello. Cheers. Bye.
For anyone who's watching online, give us a like and subscribe. We're here every week, and we will be having lessons tomorrow morning from 10:30. Next week, we'll be having lessons again from 6 o'clock till 7 o'clock is Carl's lesson. From 7 o'clock till 8 is my lesson on a Wednesday. On a Thursday, Carl will be teaching from 10:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. on that's next Thursday, and the afternoon as well from 2:30 to 4:30 p.m. as well next Thursday. So take care, everyone, and I'll speak to you soon. But please like and subscribe, and it means a lot, and it allows us to get our message out.